You're going to warm them up.
Yeah. They always put me on just after lunch. It's either because...
now they'll have a sugar rush, but by the time I get on, I'll kill them. They'll be dead.
Sets of session slides on it.
If you're going to sit in the front row, the power is problematic.
Oh, I'm not going to plug it in.
Right.
I'm happy logging in front of 50 people.
Yeah, you've got the same password of dots as everybody else.
However, I'm not happy logging in on the Danish keyboard.
Yes.
You can also don't test it by shining it with somebody else's eye.
Right. Do not test laser by shining into remaining eye.
It's a laser pointer that comes out the back. The other button does. The other button is a little light.
Oh, how useful. Just in case you're in as much of the dark as the audience. I assume end-to-end is not being used as a time period there.
Postdoctoral researcher at Cambridge University with lots of experience with the internet.
I used to work for an ISP called Demon, if you said that, because there's lots of demon stuff in there.
Carol could have told me how many slides there were.
You could use up the time productively. Don't feel obliged.
You could mess up the session tomorrow. I think all we can do is actually change the orders.
It's always a good idea. If you want power, you'll be disappointed in this row.
Okay.
You may want to go somewhere else. Depends if you want power or not. But it wasn't working.
Okay. Well, I'll listen to it.
Yeah, well, I'll vote for that. Yep.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the first session of the afternoon. In this room we'll be talking about protecting users, both in this session and the next one. This one is about, I guess, protecting users from bad stuff that happens on the network. We've got 3 speakers to talk about spam, to talk about inappropriate content, and to talk about technical security attacks. And I'm glad to say from reading the abstracts, I think they've all got at least partial solutions to those problems. So this isn't just a tale of doom and gloom. There are positive answers in here. The first speaker is Richard Clayton, who's a postdoctoral researcher at Cambridge University. In a former life, and actually still sometimes currently, he also worked for a large UK ISP called Demon, which some of you may know. So he knows a lot more about the real world of the internet than a lot of postdocs do. So, Richard, thank you.
Okay. That's fine.
Get rid of that.
Right, the point of giving a talk at a conference is to get you to read the paper. But I was too lazy to do another paper on this. So instead of which, I'm going to try and tell you that this is a good idea. Right? The general concepts of using traffic analysis to pick out patterns of behavior works in the real world. You can do it on your networks. What I'm going to talk about is processing email server logs generated by customers. I'm going to talk about processing email server logs for non-customers, people sending you data. And then I'm going to talk about some research which we're currently doing at Cambridge and at Links, which is looking at sampled SFlow data to try and pick out the patterns of spam in there. But the bottom line of why this all works is that spam does not look like real email, and therefore you can pick it out by the patterns it generates in your logs. You don't have to look at the content. You don't have to know whether or not it's about Viagra or pump and dump spams or phishing or whatever. You can pick it out because of the pattern of the way in which it is sent. So what problems do ISPs have? Well, their top problem is that their customers are insecure. There are very few spammers left who send email from their own machines. Basically, what we're talking about here in the jargon is botnets, which are compromised end-user machines, which are controlled by somebody else. We're talking about customers who can't configure their SOX proxy. We're talking about customers who haven't changed the default admin password on their copy of Exchange, so the bad guys can log into that Exchange and then authorize themselves to send email through that system. And it's not just Exchange. This isn't a story about Microsoft. There's lots and lots of other software just like that with default passwords which hasn't been changed. So what's the problem look like? There's all your customers sending their email through the ISP's email server, which I call a smart host, just to show my age. And it then goes on from there to Yahoo, to Hotmail, to wherever. And some of the customers get nasty spammers behind them, and therefore the amount of email they're sending goes up. But you can't just say that the person who's sending the most email is sending spam, because other customers are sending lots of email legitimately as well. And therefore you can't actually tell particularly easily which of your customers has a problem. So you have to wait until the email goes out to all the other people, who then send lots of complaints to your abuse team, who then have to deal with it and try and work out which customer it was by reading headers and so forth, which is a nuisance because people have complained. Because the ISP's real problem isn't the customers. The real problem is that people out there take against the ISP and say they can't control their spam problem, and they'll blacklist them. And they blacklist IP address ranges, and they blacklist the smart hosts. And therefore, if you want to continue to have your smart host available for other customers to send email through, you have to go and do something about your customers who have a problem. But the reports may not go to you. They may go just to the blacklist, or they'll miss essential details. So what actually happens is that the complaints go to the blacklist, who cuts you off, and you can't send any email, and you then have a big problem. So it would be a good idea to spot outgoing spam going through your smart host. But that's expensive. Running a copy of Spam Assassin eats up a lot of processor resources. Right? And this work originally goes back to 2002, 2003 timeframe. It was far less common then for ISPs to be running spam filtering systems for their customers. It's very common now, but it wasn't at the time. There's also a lot of legal and contractual issues if you're going to start blocking your own customers' email, and if you get false positives, then your customers have a tendency to leave. And volume, as I just said, is not a good indicator of spam, because you get a lot of customers who send 3 pieces of email a day, and then they send out 10,000 emails for their new product which they've just launched, or to invite people to a conference or something like that. And daily limits, right, which a lot of ISPs apply, they apply them to consumers, where it does make a little bit of sense, because very few people invite 10,000 people to come to their birthday party, and therefore the variation in volume is much less. For business customers, you have huge variations in volume, and you can't set limits, because all you do is you get in people's way and they leave. And the other thing is that you can't actually validate email by working out whether or not it's come from the right person, because many customers, business customers, have dozens of domains, and they use those for specialist purposes. So you can't just say, just because it appears to come from aardvark.com, then therefore it's forged. Because it may be that they own aardvark.com, it can be very difficult to tell. But the key insight, and this is what underlies the initial part of this work, is that lots of spam is to ancient email addresses from lists. Where do spammers get lists from? They get them from other lists. And lots of spam is to invented addresses. So they take some perfectly legitimate left-hand sides and put them against any domain you can think of and try sending it out, see if it gets through. So lots of spam goes to invented addresses. And also lots of spam is sent from your system and is not accepted by the destination, either because they're running filtering or because they have some view or that they know that the email address used to exist and it's now a spam trap, or they're running a limit on the number of incoming emails, or whatever it may be. So you get a lot of clues back from that. And you can process the server logs on your email smart host, and you can pick out this information about the failures. Right? And spam has lots of failures, and legitimate email, even the 10,000 person mail shot, mainly works, and therefore you can distinguish the two types of email. So this is what the picture now looks like, is you process your logs, and therefore you can pick out which of your customers has a problem, and then you can go and deal with them. And therefore you get less complaints, and you don't get blacklisted. So the key heuristics here is too many failures to deliver. And in fact, setting the level down at about 20 works pretty well, provided you do something about mailing lists. Mailing lists you have to pick out from the fact you get consistent senders, and you have to apply higher totals to those, higher failure totals, around about 10%. Most good mailing lists have less than 10% failures. But if somebody seems to be operating several mailing lists, then that almost certainly is a spammer who just isn't changing their senders around very often. And the other thing you need to do is you need to ignore bounces, because these often fail because people bounce incoming spam. They send out, still, unfortunately, you'd think they'd learn, they send out so-and-so is away on holiday to absolutely all incoming email, including all of the spam. So you need to ignore all the bounces. But provided you do that, that information I just told you on that screen tells you how to build a really good detector for your customers, your users, in order to pick out whether or not they have a spam sending problem. And as a bonus, it also detects viruses, because mass mailing worms and so forth tend to use the address book, which is mainly valid addresses, but the remote sites for much longer have been rejecting incoming viruses, and virus authors don't know how to say hello. They didn't read the RFC particularly well. They all copy each other, and they all have a tendency to say hello with the wrong thing, as a result of which you can pick that out of the data. So virus detections infections are also detected. Not that we have them anymore. Viruses now try and hide instead of sending lots of copies of themselves. But ISP email handling is a little more complicated than I just showed you, because there you have all the users, and they're sending out their data through the smart host, and it goes from there to the internet. But the incoming email is coming in, and you can process the logs in order to be able to tell whether or not they're spammers. But the incoming email doesn't come to the smart host, it comes to your MX host, or a range of them usually, right? Because if you're an ISP, you split your incoming email and your outgoing email apart. Trust me, if you don't do that, you're an idiot. So you split up the machines, and therefore, and the email comes to your customers. But some of your customers who have a problem with sending spam are not sending it through the smart host at all, because it gets blocked and can be detected, and people these days run filters. They send it straight out to the internet. But of course, some of them send that email to other of your customers. Of course, some people do firewall off so that you can't actually send out email on port 25, and that works really well for consumer ISPs, and it works really badly if you have lots of customers with Exchange and businesses and so forth, because if they have a system like that, they don't like using your smart host because they say, what if it fails? I will leave. Right, we must be able to send our email within 30 seconds of wishing to do so. We don't like all of the delays. So business ISPs do not have blocks. But some of the mail doesn't actually go out to the internet, it goes to the other customers. And therefore, once again, you can process the logs and you can pick out the patterns which show that you have customers with a problem. And you can find them and you can re-educate them. What are the heuristics here? Well, basically, the simple heuristics on number of failures work really well again, just like for the smart host. Multiple hello lines are becoming very common when you look at this type of email. They often try and match the mail from precisely in order to mislead, and it would mislead apart from the fact that every single email they send has a different mail from, and therefore it has a different hello. So that's a good pattern to look for. And sometimes they match the receipt to. I have no idea why they do that. I think they're just trying to look more authentic or something because they haven't read the RFCs. You can also, because of the way in which the system worked, you can look, a lot of malware turns up on a user's machine and says, I would like to use the smart host because I think there's a port 25 block. But they don't know where the smart host is, so they do an MX lookup in order to be able to find out what the smart host is, because they think they're on a really small ISP where those two are the same machine. But if they're on a big ISP, it doesn't work, and they end up trying to send outgoing email through the incoming email system, at which point you can pick them out really well because you get lots of rejections in the log with a really distinctive message. So looking for those, really good way of processing your logs. And of course, your incoming email these days is probably a spam filter, so you can pay attention to whether or not the email which was coming in was marked spam. And you might think that was the end of the story, but you need to deal with the fact that lots of email is forwarded from one place to another, including from one of your customers to another one of your customers, occasionally to themselves when they've made a mail loop. And therefore, you need to be able to discount all the stuff which is forwarded. How do you tell it's forwarded? It has a very consistent destination. So you have to process and pick out the patterns of very consistent destinations. You treat that as forwarding, and you don't apply quite the same heuristics to the forwarded email. And this is what real email, this is going through Daemon on the 19th, which was Saturday, I think. And this is what real email looks like going through one of Daemon's compromised customers. And as you can see, the exclamation marks is the undeliverable email, and the ones with little arrows, including the 31 more valid destinations, are all the ones that worked. But because they sent enough of this during the day, they knocked up more than the 20 failures for the day, as a result of which this got picked out and went to the abuse team as a report, so we were able to deal with this customer the following day. This is what incoming email looks like, with lots of hello messages, all of which are the same. You can see that they're trying to match up the hello message with the sender, but they do it with different ones. Now, this machine is probably sending lots and lots of other email to the rest of the internet. It just so happens that it's sending to 4 daemon customers over a period of about 7 minutes. So we pick that out, we process it, we pull it out with the heuristics, we found them. This is a graph of the data which we got out of our system, which I did for a paper a year or so ago. And you'll see basically the little black dots with the upward pointing triangles are the spam reports on basically per day. You can see that when the system starts off, we have quite a lot of those, but basically it sort of dies away. And then around the beginning of 2005, the number goes up a bit. There's a step change there. That's when we introduced the system for processing incoming email, because originally we were only doing it on the smart host. And it carries on, and occasionally we get little spikes, as we did at the beginning of last year. Right. The red dots, the downward pointing triangles, which is very spiky, that's viruses. So the viruses in September 2003 was Sven. In February 2004, that was My Doom. The one in the summer of 2004, that was Netsky, and the other one when the German people had a war with each other, producing new viruses every 6 hours. And as you can see, viruses are very spiky in behavior because lots of customers get it all at the same time, but we're able to pick these out. This is another way of looking at our data, which is the red and black dots along the bottom are the number of reports that the abuse team dealt with, either from our system, our internal system, or by external reports coming in. The external report, the total number of reports is in blue, and you'll see that it takes off after the summer of 2005. That's because we struck some deals with some other people like AOL and various other companies that they would send reports of all incoming spam which was turning up at their machines, which they fed back to us. But you'll notice that though the number of reports is going up, the number of actual customers who have a problem is staying fairly constant. And what that tells me is that our internal system is picking up the vast majority of customers who have a problem, because even with many, many more reports, we're still not finding very many more people. So this system works. Buoyed up by this great success in processing email server logs and solving problems for Daemon, came up with a good way of wasting my time as an academic, much more fun than working. And we're looking here at what really happens to email when it goes from the customers directly out to the internet. It doesn't, in fact, of course, go out to the internet, at least not in the UK. Almost all of it goes through the exchange point, which is called links. And links is one of the biggest exchange points in the world. It's shifting 150 gig of traffic, that sort of thing. It really is very large. And therefore, the idea was that perhaps we should have a look at the data as it goes through links in order to see whether or not we can pick out the patterns which are indicative of sending email spam. Now, links, for its own purposes, for monitoring the exchange, is sampling 1 in 2048 packets using SFlow. The way in which that works is literally it's a sample, so after it counts on its fingers until it gets up to 2048, and then it dumps that packet out using SFlow. And links are providing to my research project the port 25 traffic, i.e. the SMTP, the email traffic, which goes across links. And therefore, we ought to be able to process this and pick out the wicked spammer, or at least the customer who is being exploited by the wicked spammer. And it kind of works in that this is a machine which we know is an open server. How do we know this? Because I looked at the incoming logs from the whole of the internet for the period for which this data was collected, for a 24-hour period, and my log processing heuristics said this is a sender of spam. So that's good. So we know it's a sender of spam, so we look at how many packets we can see going across the links. And it's kind of spiky. And we can see that they must be a wicked spammer because they're sending email at 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 8 o'clock at night. Real people don't do that. The sad thing is that 1 in 2048 is not a lot, and therefore in the entire hour at 8 o'clock we're only seeing 15 packets going across the exchange, which is not very many packets for picking out patterns, believe me. However, this looks fairly convincing. All we've got to do is spot lots of patterns like this, and we will be able to find all of the wicked spammers. However, here's another spammer. And unfortunately, this spammer is managing to send spam through a system between 9 in the morning and 7 in the evening, which is kind of working day-ish. They're sending a whole lot more at midnight as well, so that's good. So it's kind of sort of spiky, but it's not quite the pattern. Part of the reason for this is there is some real email mixed in with the spam here. And of course, at the packet level, where all you're seeing is who it was from and who it was to, it's a little tricky to pick out whether or not this is good email or bad email when you just got one packet from the whole exchange and you don't get any content whatsoever. So tell me whether or not, they don't set the evil bit, unfortunately, so it's a bit tricky to tell. So this sort of pattern is depressing. However, as a first cut at processing this, and because lots of spammers do send in bursts. Why do they send in bursts? Because they're trying to hide. This is great, right? What we want is spammers trying to hide because they've no idea what real email looks like, and therefore they try and hide in the most inappropriate way, so their patterns are easy to pick out. So let's suppose we look at the number of hours active compared with the number of 4-hour blocks in which they are active. So basically split up the day into either hours or into 4-hour blocks, and then see whether or not look at the relationship between those. And we use the incoming email to daemon. I picked a large ISP in the UK with millions of customers and looked at all of our customers which were sending email to daemon, which was about 10,000 of them, and looked to see how many of them we thought were sending spam, which was about 9,000 of them, and basically try and mark them up as good and bad. The problem was that it really was, if they were sending any email at all, then they were bad. Nevertheless, we had a go at this, and we get this rather complicated looking graph. The nearest thing is easiest to look at, which is they're sending during every 4 hour, they're sending during 6 of the 4-hour periods during a day, i.e. in every 4-hour period they are sending email, and if they manage to send in 23 of those hours, there's about a 0.6% chance they're a spammer. And if they only send in fewer of them, there's a lower chance that they're a spammer, which doesn't sort of help very much, to be honest. However, if we look at the second row back, that's a bit more interesting. I picked that out specially. These are IP addresses which were active in 5 out of the 6 possible 4-hour periods during the day. And if they only sent during 8 single-hour periods during the day, there was a 100% chance they were a spammer, which is good. And if they sent during 20 of the possible hours, there was also a 100% chance they were a spammer. And in between, there's all sorts of other things where they may be a spammer, they may be not. So this is looking a bit more hopeful. Bottom line on this is that it's necessary to pre-process the data to pick out these people and separate them out before doing this sort of analysis, because otherwise the two different types of activity mess with each other and produce these really bad looking results. So a lot more work to do. The S-flow data coming from links is always going to be useful, even if this processing turns out not to work, because we're just not seeing enough packets. There's no particular guarantee. Because it's 1 in 2048, they might manage to send dozens of pieces of spam and we'd never see anything at all. Also, the analysis may improve a bit because Links has only actually got the data, the S-flow data, running on one of its 2 peering rings, and therefore we're not actually seeing anything like 150 gig of traffic. We're seeing a lot less. And the other thing we can do is, besides looking at variations in time, start looking at variations of destination, because spammers have a tendency to work off lists which are sorted in various ways in order to be able to pick out whether or not they are, and therefore you'll tend to get a consistency of sending, which moves around a bit, which again will not be typical of real email. So, to summarize what I've been talking about, first of all, processing outgoing server logs works really well, and it keeps your smart hosts out of the blacklist. We've been doing that at Daemon in production, basically, for over 4 years now. It's great. Processing incoming server logs is also effective, but you may not see very much looped back traffic depending on what sort of site you are, depending on the mixture of customers that you have. And we're trying to process sampled S-flow data. The sampling makes it a real challenge, and much more work is needed on good distinguishers in order to be able to get some really impressive results. And though I said that this is not a talk to make you read the papers, if you are interested in the papers, then they've all appeared in a sequence at the conference on email and anti-spam. URL is up there, and basically each year I've turned up and been able to say that we've got one more bit of the puzzle sorted out. So thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Richard?
Thanks. Maurizio Molina from Dante. You have spoken about S-flow. Is there any chance that your method works with NetFlow data?
There's no particular reason why it shouldn't work with NetFlow even better, because you've got much more chance of picking out the flows, and you'll have information like the length and so forth. One of the useful things you can do with server logs is you can actually tell the difference between whether or not something is junk email spam or whether or not it's a virus because of the length. Viruses tend to have very fixed sizes, and they're not absolutely constant like they used to be. They vary them around a bit. But basically, if you see all of the email which looks problematic showing up in the logging is all about 40K long, right, then you know it's a virus, and your abuse team will in fact know which virus it is and be able to give very specific advice, because they'll know what the 40K virus is this month. And if you see everything 29K, then again, it will be a virus. And in general, spam email is much, much shorter. That is changing with the pump and dump spammers and the GIFs which they send, which are quite large, and therefore you can't, the rules are, change over time. But basically, it is an extra clue, the size, and therefore being able to get the size out of your NetFlow data will give rather more things to work with in terms of trying to get a grasp on the patterns, which will be different. Right. Real email sent by real customers has huge variation in sizes. They'll send lots of very short emails, and they'll send lots of PowerPoint presentations which are very big. Right. And they're all mixed up together, whereas spammers just do not have that mix.
Okay, thanks.
Probably time for one more. Anybody else?
Okay. Right. You're welcome.
Okay, while the microphone's being transferred, our next speaker is Ronan Burn from HEANet. He's been... Sorry, okay. Over the past couple of years, I think, Ronan's been responsible for the rollout of the HEANet backbone, not just to cover universities and further education colleges as it used to, but to deal with schools as well. As anybody who's had to provide networks to schools know, controlling inappropriate content is much more of an issue for schools. I think last year, or the year before?
Last year, 2005.
Last year, Ronan spoke about...
Sorry, 2000.
Last year, 2 years ago.
In anger. In anger, 2006.
Ronan spoke about plans for managing content filtering for schools, and I think he has what looked like a fairly positive report back on how it worked in practice. So, Ronan, thank you.
I think so. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, we've been connecting schools for 2 years now, in anger really last year when we had the main volume come on. So we've been connecting to schools for 2 years, but we've also been filtering that content for 2 years. And really this presentation is a summary of a piece of research I conducted to see, is it being effective and is it delivering a safer online environment for Irish schools. The structure, I'll give you a brief background on just the Irish Schools Network, very quick look at the technical design and where content filtering fits into that, the approach I adopted for the survey, and then findings and conclusions. The background, we're dealing with 4,000 schools. The breakdown is about 3,200 primary and 800 post-primary. So the majority is post-primary or junior schools. It's a free service to schools, which is funded through a 3-year government and telecoms industry agreement, which expires next year, interestingly enough. The result of the Department of Education public tender resulted in broadband awards to 6 telcos, so that's 6 access providers, and they're interconnecting directly with HANet's backbone. So I think that's unique across European NRANs anyway. So 6 telcos interconnecting to HANet. We manage the backbone, but we also deliver a variety of managed services. Obviously, managed internet, we issue public IP addresses, managed DNS, network monitoring. We also police the SLAs of these 6 access providers, so we're checking latency and other good stuff like that. Network security, we manage the routers in the schools, we manage the ACLs in the schools. Webmail, up to a population of approx 800,000 potential users. Web hosting for schools. Content filtering, the subject of this presentation. And HANet schools don't interface directly with schools on a technical basis. It's a second-line support. First line is performed by an agency of the Department of Education. Briefly, simply, technical overview. This is essentially what it looks like. These are the schools down the end. These are connecting us with a variety of DSL, wireless, and a considerable amount of satellite, unfortunately, but that's the way it goes. These are the 6 access providers, and the joys of public tendering is you can't influence where they wish to land their presentations, so you have 5 interconnecting with one school's POP and a single one connecting with a second POP. These are just central services, email, and so forth. So the schools get onward connectivity to the internet and other education networks. The 2 chassis are situated here, which are the content filtering chassis. What do they look like? They look like this. This is a 40-gauge chassis, essentially a chassis full of processor blades and management blades. Why are we doing content filtering? A lot of NRANs don't do content filtering. Well, the first reason is it's a requirement. We were asked to do it by the Department of Education and Science. Why centralized content filtering? I think because the thoughts of doing it the other way around is quite frightening, which is an individual box in each school. You've got a remote device in 4,000 schools, but also the IT skill set in schools would not be what you'd be used to at third level. Some is good, some not so good. So a centralized approach, and we manage the policies centrally. As a result of a public procurement, we awarded an Irish reseller with this Fortinet solution. Security node in each POP, as I said, with 4 blades. We have 4 blades in our chassis currently, and that will give us about half a gig of transparent inline processing. It does web filtering, it also does virus scanning, anti-spam, and IDS and IPS. It also does logging and stats, which is of relevance later on in this presentation. And this is important. The security profiles, we do not define the filtering levels or what sites should be blocked or what sites should be allowed. We don't play God in that manner. The Department of Education do, and it keeps us out of the newspapers as well, which is good. Fortinet web filtering, you're probably familiar with filtering products. Fortinet is quite amazingly familiar, similar to WebSense, if you're familiar with WebSense. Typical categories, potentially liable, the usual suspects there, controversial, and then the more benign ones, business, sports, etc. 76 categories currently, we had 56 last year. Fortinet deliver 24/7 managed service, so they're constantly updating their database. As well as blocking and allowing by category, you have this concept of white and black lists. White is always allowed, black is always blocked, regardless of whether it's in an allowed category. Unrated sites, a policy we adopted for unrated sites, and by what I mean by that is a site that's just not recognized by the Fortinet database. We block until it's been rated, which typically takes less than 24 hours, about 18 hours. So if you try an unrated site today, you'd be able to access it from tomorrow onwards. Currently, there are 2 levels of filtering offered to schools by the Department of Education. One is quite a walled garden approach, and the other is a little bit more liberal. But only two options currently, and a school has to subscribe to a filtering level. It has to subscribe to an AUP, a security AUP, and select a filtering level before we allow it to connect. So the question I asked last year, we invested quite a lot of money and quite a lot of time and energy in this. We're a little bit removed from the schools, as I suggested, with the second line role. So I conducted a survey to see, is it working? Is it being effective? And it's not such a simple question when you examine it, because there's various facets to it, I would suggest. I identified 4 key research questions. 1, do schools welcome it? Do they generally support it? Do they think it's a good thing? Second, is it good at doing its job, essentially, which is blocking the bad stuff? Third, is there a degree of over-blocking and blocking valid educational sites or other useful sites? And this 4th one I thought was a useful asset test, which is, with the introduction to filtering solution, are teachers more inclined to incorporate the internet in classroom activity? So that was just an asset test I thought I'd tease further. For those of you interested in methodologies, mixture of quantitative and qualitative, the survey questionnaire was mainly qualitative, the quality of the service. I conducted follow-up telephone interviews just to tease things out a bit further through telephone. And then the analysis of filtering logs is essentially numeric, so that's a quantitative methodology. Conducted a survey about this time last year, contacted 400 schools, a representative sample, so a mix of primary and post-primary, and also schools that were not using the network. I initially focused in on those that were using it, and I went, no, hold on. It could be schools that are not using it because of the filtering, so I included a representative sample of them. The questionnaire was designed to address these 4 key questions I asked. I sent the questionnaire by post and by email, and which do you think came back with the best response? Post, which is interesting in the concept of a schools network, I thought. And the post came back with over 50% response, about 105, and email just 30 odd. And I also asked, so that's a single response from 136 schools, but I also asked a single school, 10 teachers at a single school, to also fill out the survey, just to get some triangulation and to remove some potential bias. Because the main questionnaire is likely to be filled out by the principal or the IT coordinator. So what are the findings? I'm going to hit you with a lot of stats here, so just bear with me. Presented in a similar fashion. You have 4 columns here, which is all schools aggregated together, and then I separate out primary, secondary, and then this 10-teacher school I talked about. So the first question I asked was, should it be filtered? Do they consider it should be filtered, agree or disagree, etc.? So the blue color here is strongly agree. So that's pretty impressive. That's pretty categoric. And that top line there is agree. One teacher here, I think, remained neutral. So that's pretty convincing. Responsibility. Do you feel the school has a responsibility to filter? And again, all schools, primary, some a little bit of a no creeping in on the secondary, and then 2 teachers in the single school. But in the main, a significant answer regarding responsibility. And we're dealing with 136 schools out of a potential population of 4,000. So the confidence level here is quite good, which means if you were to conduct a survey across the full population, these would be fairly indicative of what the answer would be. Now we get into the nitty-gritty. Is it effective at blocking the bad stuff? And what we would like to see is always effective, this blue color. And most times effective is acceptable, I would suggest as well. But blue, just about 40%, another 45%, and then a mix at the top. But you can see what's interesting, the difference between primary and secondary. Less secondary think it's always effective. And if we peel the onion a little bit further, does it block, overblock? Does it block valid educational sites? What you probably want here is it never or seldom, but occasionally is probably acceptable, and that's the larger yellow picture here. But again, if you compare primary with secondary, it seems more secondary or post-primary are affected, i.e. overblocking appears to be a bigger issue with the secondary schools. I asked the same question again around sensitivity of internet filtering. Does it block too many sites? Does it allow too many sites? Or does it seem to be just right? And what the right answer, if you like, is seems to be just right. And all schools, again, not bad. More of the primary schools seem to be satisfied with it. But again, a significant difference there, I'd suggest, with the post-primary secondary schools. So secondary schools, you know, we're seeing that they're more affected by the overblocking. Fortunately, the majority of our schools are primary schools, but nonetheless, there's 800 schools that seem to be impacted to a greater extent. And with regard to this blocking, I thought a natural question to follow on would be, well, would you like to manage it yourself? And you can see the red or purple color is no, which to me was quite a surprise. Even in primary, that's what, nearly 60% are saying no, they don't want to manage it locally themselves. This was the acid test, which I thought was an interesting one. Are teachers more inclined to use the internet in the classroom with the filtering in place? And this, I would suggest, is quite an impressive 78% say they would incorporate it more. So that's just short of 4 out of every 5 schools would incorporate the internet further with the filtering in place. I think that's quite a good political statement, and it runs right across there as well, which is pretty good. The others incorporate as before, so that's pretty good. The last one of these slides is a straight question: do you consider it's delivering a safer online environment, which was the question we asked at the beginning. And again, strongly agree on what we're looking for. And again, quite emphatic, that's, I think it's 96% of all schools either strongly agree or agree that it is delivering a safer online environment. So these are pretty impressive positive statements. I then tried to get some more objective scientific information. So I looked at our Fortinet logs for the same group of schools, 136 schools, for just 1 week now. So that's a 5-day school week. And this is what we find. It translates into just over 6 million HTTP gets or hits for 136 schools for 1 week. The biggest piece of the pie is fortunately allowed, which is just over 80%. Whitelisted will always be allowed, so that's good as well. Typically, by the way, there would be, you know, public state sites and so forth, which the department would always want to allow, or educational sites, that type of thing. Unrated, their smallest piece of the pie is 1.7%, so those would be re-rated again. I'd suggest, this time last year, I would suggest it's probably less a year on, because more schools will visit the same sites again. So I'd suggest that's probably less at the moment. Blocked by category, the 3.67%, that's the piece we want to examine further. And what it looks like when you examine it is this. The top 10 blocked categories across all schools, and our friend spyware is right at the top of the league table, which is probably not surprising. But significant hits there on adult materials, personals and dating. We block Bebo, for example, in MySpace. File sharing and storage, right way down to advocacy groups. Advocacy groups is a very interesting one. It's quite a controversial one, because you've got some quite extreme advocacy things which you certainly wouldn't like to allow. But then you've got possibly more benign ones like Save the Whale and so forth, which some schools like to look at. So that's interesting. I then thought it would be interesting to compare the behavior of post-primary and primary schools and see, are they trying to hit different categories. The first one here, it's not meant to be an eye test, so I kind of just picked out the bigger numbers here. So this is post-primary, and spyware is up there, but adult materials is actually featuring higher, 37,000, 34,000. Personals and dating, they obviously like to meet people. File sharing and pornography featuring there. But quite a variety of categories been hit there. So some could say that reflects a healthy nation. I don't know, maybe. The kids are looking at all sorts of interesting stuff. Primary schools, just compare that again. Post-primary, quite a lot of hits across a wide variety of categories, but primary schools less so. See that? Spyware, it's a blight for everybody. 71,000. Again, we're dealing with a bigger population. That's why it's a bigger number. But interestingly, malicious websites and adult materials are creeping out of the survey. And that's possibly interesting because I think a lot of internet activity may well be teacher-led or so forth, but why these are creeping out, I think, is possibly room for further research. So what are we saying from all of that? With regard to the general support, we're saying, yes, the teachers are welcoming it. There's no evident opposition coming through on the survey. It's not considered a form of censorship. I asked the question, do you consider it a form of censorship in the context of schools? And this is interesting because in the States there's an act, the CIPA Act, Children's Internet Protection Act, which schools are obliged to filter their access, otherwise they don't get public funding. And there's quite a furore over it being deemed a censorship in the States. So not considered a form of censorship. Teachers support the filtering concept, even though similar controls don't exist outside schools. So even though the kid goes home to their home PC and so forth, and the controls filtering is not there, the teachers still feel it is required within schools. Another interesting stat here was, I showed you the responsibility. 99% felt they had a responsibility to filter, but yet only 26 had a solution in place prior to HUNet's solution going in. So I think the questions there would be, what are the inhibitors to them introducing filtering themselves? Is it funding? Is it education, technical support, so forth? But that's quite interesting. Only 1 in 4 had a solution in place. Is it effective at blocking inappropriate content? I'd suggest the numbers we've seen certainly reflect inappropriate content has been blocked. I accept there will be some over-blocking within that, but in the main, I think we could safely say it has blocked content not suitable for the general curriculum. 3.7% of traffic were to blocked categories. That's over 220,000, which may not sound like a lot of HTTP hits, but when you extrapolate that across a full school calendar and across the full population of 4,000, it does amount to a significant amount of inappropriate content. Interestingly, spyware is just over 2%. So every 2 out of every 100 HTTP gets is spyware generated, which is particularly of interest to us from a bandwidth consumption point of view, because we have a lot of satellite. So we don't want to see spyware consuming our valuable satellite bandwidth. And a significant reduction in viruses. I don't have a metric on this because, as you can see from the last slide, or last presentation, viruses can be seasonal and so forth, and it depends on how many schools turn up on a day. But we had a report which I would suggest has decreased in viruses probably at least 8-fold, at least, if not 10-fold, since we introduced this. The extent of over-blocking, again, we saw 85% of primary schools described it as being just right. However, 52% of post-primary felt it was just right. So that suggests to me that primary schools are suffering more with the over-blocking factor. So it would suggest that a filtering level, particularly to primary schools, post-primary schools, is needed. Remember, all schools just get 2 options, which is the walled garden or the more liberal one. And interestingly, for the schools I contacted by telephone, all the schools that were on the restrictive walled garden one had moved to the more liberal one, albeit they reflect they would like a more middle ground. So I would suggest a filtering level somewhere between the walled garden and the restrictive level we have is required for those schools. The majority of schools do not desire local control, and ask the question, do you want to take responsibility for it? Absolutely not. In fact, on the questionnaires you can see where they say they would take control of it, and then they read the would you take responsibility for it, and they go back and change their answer, which is interesting. However, when presented with a teacher override option, what I mean by that is if a teacher hits a particular URL that's blocked, that they could override it through a user authentication for that URL for that session, the majority of schools would welcome that approach, but they do not want to own it for whatever reason. More research is required on that, probably human resource, I would suggest. Inclination to use the internet, I think this is a key message. I was very surprised by this. That's the 78%, 4 out of 5 say they would further incorporate the internet in classroom. And when you consider this is a Department of Education initiative to feed into the whole knowledge economy concept, the fact that 4 out of 5 schools are using it more can only help that. So I would suggest it's a significant success factor in itself. And if I was a politician heading into a general election in Ireland next Thursday, I'd be waving that flag, to be honest. There you go. So in closing, we're saying the teachers, they welcome the filtering service, which is a good thing, because again, we're removed, so we don't know how it's being received by teachers. They actually feel, with some of the telephone interviews, they actually need a check because there's an air of complacency coming in. And I asked questions about their expectation, and their expectation was it would block everything. It's a 100% guarantee, but that is absolutely not the case. So they welcome it, but again, they need to be aware that it's not a 100% fix. Inappropriate material is being blocked. However, the caution there is things like Google Images, things like translation sites, they're quite difficult to keep up to date with. Anonymous proxies, guaranteed there'll be one in the next hour. So blocking proxies is what we call whack-a-mole. So we whack one anytime we see one come up. And we're relying on schools to tell us of proxies that, it could be students themselves that are setting up. So inappropriate material is being blocked, but there are ways around it, and the technology needs to keep pace with the latest developments in websites, particularly images. That's a tough one. Degree of overblocking is not significant for the majority, and that's even for post-primary. For the ones I followed up with telephone interviews, post-primary said they were quite acceptable of the level of overblocking, and their attitude was if somebody wants to do their online banking, a teacher, they should do it at home, which was quite refreshing, I thought. Large volume of spyware is being blocked, 2%, as we've seen. Virus incidents are going in the right direction, which is downward. Another key stat is 96% of schools surveyed agree or strongly agree is delivering a safer online environment. So I was somewhat surprised by these stats, because when you're sitting in the knock desk, all you hear is usually negative news and bad issues. But these are very good. And the 78%, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's a key message. 4 out of 5 schools are inclined to use it more. Whether they actually are is difficult to establish. But I'll end on the caution that filtering technology is in no means a silver bullet, and that supervision is possibly the best filtering solution of all. But I think it's a good start, and I think the findings we have here, I think we should repeat this survey again in the not too distant future, because a lot of the schools had this, some had only had it for 6 months, some had had it for a year, but it would be interesting to go back and repeat the survey and see if the same findings are happening. So it's not a silver bullet, and as ever, any filtering technology is not the finished article. It's good, it helps the innocent in the main, but there will always be some rogue players that will endeavor to get around it. So in that regard, So in closing, I would say it is delivering a safer online environment, and the stats that we have do support that. That's it. Thanks for your attention.
We've got time for
two questions.
Previous studies I've seen on filtering in schools have said that the biggest problem was, in fact, 11-year-olds, the top end of the primary system, who felt that they were the boss and they were the biggest kids in the school, and the amount of whereas the biggest kids in the school at secondary school, in fact, had gathered a little bit that they had to behave themselves and that the blocking really worked, and therefore they triggered it less. It's interesting that your data is really rather different from that. right? And it might be worth sort of looking at the other reports and seeing how it matched up. The other point I wanted to make was that a lot of studies are now showing that Google search results are in fact much safer places to go to than Google adverts, right? And that, right, because the people who have bad things pay for adverts in order to get you to go to their site, which is going to infect you with spyware or otherwise malicious. The other thing that people do with bad sites is they put them up on subtle misspellings of other sites.
Yes.
It will be very interesting to look at your data to see whether or not you can pick out why people went to these sites, whether or not they just turned up with a yellow sticky and typed them in, or whether or not, in fact, it's a result of a Google search or something like that effectively going wrong for them, and that is why that they're visiting the range of sites which they are, rather than just assuming that it's because they suddenly sat there in the board lesson and thought, let's look at some porn.
Yeah, and indeed, Google Images we can manage, but others like I think it was Alta Vista, it works slightly differently, which is more difficult to trap the URL that's in the URL string, or the bad website that's in the URL string. So those ones, the Images sites, they work differently. The search engines work differently, and it's trying to keep up with those. I haven't drilled down into the actual URLs that the schools are accessing in this. It's just purely at content level, but that certainly would be room for more research, certainly.
There was another one.
Well, two questions. One question. The first one is you filter HTTP traffic. Are there any plans to filter P2P traffic or such thing? And the second question is, do you filter the content based on the URL only, or also based on the content of the pages or the images or fleshy images or naughty pages? The
last question there, it is URL based. So you can allow down to a particular web page within the site, but it is URL based. Your first question, I didn't.
Do you block peer-to-peer?
Peer-to-peer, we can block. In fact, we have blocked it for a few larger users, let's say, on our satellite network, where the satellite bandwidth is so contended that we would deem peer-to-peer to be impacting other schools. So we can do it. Again, Fortinet will allow you to block peer-to-peer. You just set up a different policy and you add in peer-to-peer to block within that. So you can do it specific to particular schools. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned about security templates that are controlled by the Ministry of Education. Could you give us an example of that?
Well, the listing of categories that you saw there, yeah, that's just a snapshot. There's actually 76 categories and subcategories like controversial, potentially liable. There's another one called bandwidth consuming, for example. So here you can see allow or block. So we presented the Department of Education with these are the options. Which one do you want to allow? Which ones do you want to block?
So it's a non-off situation. Excuse me.
Sorry?
So it's only allow or block. The sensitivity?
Yeah, only allow or block. And this is the problem with because it's black and white, over-blocking is inevitable. But where you can grey the areas is with the white list and the black lists. So if it's on a white list, it will always be allowed. So if you had advocacy, for example, the one I mentioned, advocacy, where you've got quite extreme stuff in there, but you've got Save the Whale and other lesser extreme stuff, you could put that on a white list. So you could still block advocacy as a group, but still allow the individual sites.
And these are all decisions by the ministry?
They approve it, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The categories are set by the supplier.
No, I'm talking about the white list and the black lists.
The white list
and
black.
They're also involved in this decision?
They are indeed, and
Right.
and we wait to receive an instruction to block. We don't block. We do obviously block known proxies and known malware, etc. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
Thank you. Microphones flying everywhere. So everybody who wants to leave has left, and everybody who wants to come in's got a seat. Our final speaker in this session is Christoph Graf from Switch. He's head of network security at Switch, and he's also head of the network security research activities in the GN2 project. I think it's probably more that you're talking about than Switch, but Christoph.
Okay, welcome everybody. And as you can see from the slides, the Géron hat is the more important one at the moment. So what am I going to talk about? It's what we are doing inside the Géron 2 about security. So I'll talk a little bit about Géron 2, or some figures which are interesting in this context. Then the goal we would like to achieve, which is a pretty high-level one, so I'm not going into details. Then the environment we are working in, the players in this field, the approach we take, and then where we stand and what we are going to do next. So the project Géron 2, I copied that from some PR slides I got and just took out 3 bullets which I think are quite interesting in this context here. It works. Okay, so the project partners are basically the NRENs plus 2 important players in the NREN field, which is Dante and Tirina. The network itself, it connects 34 European countries. It serves quite a few research and education establishments, so that's beyond 3,500. And eventually the users which are connected by this network, it's a pretty big number as well. It's over 30 million. And the goal is to establish some sort of security. We would like to make the Géron 2 community a secure community. Now, security, it doesn't come for free. So, of course, we do not make it just secure. We would like to make it as secure as needed. So we establish the baseline of what we want to achieve, and this is what we are going for. Now a question arises, who is the Géron 2 community? So who is going to be secured? And the answer is, yes, we would like to go down to the users. So this large community of 30 million people using the network should find a secure environment. The view from above, it's this network connecting 34 countries. You certainly have enough opportunity to get more details about that, be it on the stand, be it in other presentations. But it doesn't really show the users. So now let's try to find them. So we dig a little bit deeper. We start from the top with the Géron 2 network, which I just showed. And now there are 30 NRENs, which then provide connectivity within their remits. And maybe they do it directly to the organizations, maybe they work through regional networks. It depends on the type of NREN. So there are different models in use throughout Europe. Here we have those 3,500 research and education establishments. They are usually subdivided in organizational units, and only then we actually reach the end users. To make things more complicated, we cross national and also jurisdiction boundaries on this level here. So the NRENs, they operate within their own legal framework within their country, and of course they differ. Here we cross organizational boundaries. So we've got legal entities down here, usually within the research and education organizations. and the NRAN has only limited power, so to speak, as does Géant over the NRANs. And down here we have very different types of affiliations. So we have users which are directly employed by an organization, and in some cases it's a kind of a bit loose relationship we see. So lots of variety in this picture and lots of boundaries to cover. And still, we would like to make this a secure community. Now let's see where the security stakeholders are in this map. So on the level of Géant 2, we have Dante, Tirina, we have the project policy bodies all in place. Of course, they are quite important for our goals. On the level of the NRANs, most of the NRANs do operate their own CERT, so the computer emergency response teams. It comes quite natural that we are working together with them a lot. Further down the line, the organizations, they usually have, or they should have, site security teams or site security contacts. Larger sites will have a real team, smaller sites probably a virtual team. Lots of different models out there, and I'm not going to sum all the different possibilities up here. Finally, within the organizational unit, there are system administrators, and they finally then deal with the end users. So all of them in some way are part of the big picture, and we have to integrate them, and all together we can make this community a safe place to be in. Within the Géant 2 project, those are the players we are directly working with. So the NRAN certs play a major role here. We are not directly going down the line, but the certs themselves, they should work together with the site security teams. They should organize their own customer base. And within the organizations, a similar picture here. The site security teams should get in contact with their system administrators, learn their needs, find solutions to the problems they have, and so on. And if we all play together, then we can make this a safe place to be in. So how important is security? Security, let's face it, it's a pain in some ways. It's not for free, definitely not, and it makes lots of things more complicated. And we have issues. Some think, well, it's a too tight security, we cannot work anymore. Others think, well, it's too open, lots of stuff is going wrong, and so on. So, but let's now look into the question, why do some care more than others? And I think a very nice analogy is coming from the Maslow's work. He created this sort of pyramid to explain an issue in psychology. And what he said, he published it, I think, in the early 40s. The source, I found it, is here. And he says that as long as some physiological needs are not met to some satisfactory level, you're not talking about safety. And if you are in an environment where you feel safe enough, then you care about the community. You would like to be in a community. And if that is met to a satisfactory level, then you start to find not only just a place in your community, but then you are looking for finding a good place. And I think while this is meant to be for humans, we can kind of search the analogy for NRANs and see what that means in that environment. And I think the physiological needs, we can say, well, it kind of maps to the physical ones in the networking world. So we do have a Géant 2 network. And if you are no longer just preoccupied with making that work, then it certainly becomes an issue that what we have should be also reasonably secure. Oops. And here comes the certs. But it's not good enough to secure your own environment. Then you have to go a step further, and you have to to look into finding your place in the community. And if you care about security inside your network and you would like to convey that trust to the community, then you have to look into policy issues. If you go a step further, then you can say, well, yes, I'm now a member of this community, but I would like to be a well-regarded member of this community, a better one than the others. And then conferences like this one offer you the opportunity to actually show that, for instance. So that's one of the reasons why people probably stand up here. So, and not everybody is in the same place. So some people are maybe preoccupied with getting the network to their place. So that's the first thing they are after. So they are not really thinking security and they are not thinking community or policies, because this is what they want. And as long as you're in that mood, it's difficult to convince people that security is important. But we have lots of entrants which are in this level here, and for them it is important. So they try to get into the direction of imposing policies, things like that. And of course it every now and then clashes. But that's kind of to be expected. I couldn't really come up with a nice analogy to the top one, but I leave that as an exercise to the listeners here. Okay, the approach we take. I would like to start with a small chart. I would like to map the partner security teams in this graph in here. And the graph shows on the vertical the security capabilities a team has, and here the evolvement over time. And given the diversity we have in our community, it doesn't come as a surprise that the different security teams are at a very different level. So we do have entrants where there is no real cert or not a well-established one, maybe a very basic ones. And we have leading edge teams which go into, which do way more, and they do proactive monitoring. They try to become way more proactive in any activity they do than just react to things which are going wrong. And again, this is something which is quite well explainable with the Maslow pyramid, because you have something, you want to protect it, and you want to be proactive so that nothing goes wrong. And the ones which are just entering the scene, they are not in this mood or not yet. We do have a GN2 security compliance level defined, so we know what we expect from our partners. Basically, we would like to see that they operate a cert. We have some additional requirements on them. And this requirement, it can change over time, so it's not fixed. And of course, we would like that the partners which are below level at this moment, that they reach this compliance level during the framework of GN2. But that's not the full picture. We would like to also improve the leading edge teams, because there are new threats out there, and the leading edge teams, they quite naturally try to be proactive, anticipate what's going on, and find solution to find those eventualities as well. So the picture we would like to reach is this one, that all the teams are above the compliance level, and that the teams which were quite a bit above that level already, that they get even better over time. So where are we quite now? We have those two issues, so improving the leading edge teams and reaching the compliance level, so those two focus we have. On the first one, improving the leading edge teams. The reason why they want to do that, because there are new threats looming and they want to do something about it. For them, we have a tool set. We call it the tool set. The elements in there are a Flowmon probe. It's an appliance which is turning network traffic into net flow data. That's one bit. And the other one is NFSen. It's a software solution which takes the net flow data and adds visualization and analysis to it. So for many, or maybe even the most of the end-to-ends, they do have access to NetFlow data from their routers. Some don't, and for them, the Flowmon probe is a quite an interesting appliance to get that NetFlow data. And in other cases, it allows you to get NetFlow data from places where you do not really, or not yet, get it. So those two together, we call the tool set. What is it being used for? I may say that it's kind of the working horse for many CERT teams. They do incident handling. It also creates incidents because they see stuff going wrong, and that's what they do with this tool set. And another very important feature of it is that it's more like a framework to trial out new concepts. So leading edge concepts from research, new algorithms, we can put them to test, figure out whether it makes sense to add such a functionality, and if yes, we will then implement it. On the reaching compliance level, well, one of the reasons why we would like to see that in place is because of the rule of the weakest link. The network is a cooperative effort, and if I'm from a network with good security level and I would like to establish a connection to somewhere else, I would like that they operate in the same way. And if they don't, then they break my service. So the rule of the weakest link in networking applies in this way. So the message we have for them is, please operate the cert, so we at least have a person to talk to if things go wrong. And we have a way into their community, and we can influence things that way. In order for this to happen, we largely use existing initiatives and established services. Transits is offering training for certs, for new cert members. TI is the trusted introducer, where cert teams get registered, so you can get into the database. But in order to get there, you have to go through a process. You will be analyzed by some security experts, and they will figure out whether you kind of belong into that league, whether you have your processes described good enough. And TFC Cert is a forum where the certs gather together, exchange their views, discuss new developments, and so on. So we use all those existing initiatives and services for the certs to gather together and network the certs. So what's coming next? The Flowmon probe we have, this is the probe producing NetFlow data. It's in a relatively early stage, I would call it pre-production at the moment, and we would like to help turning that into a product. So we are still trialing this very promising pre-production appliance, and definitely would like to see it becoming a stable product, stable and reliable. NFCen is being used by many teams. What we should do here is improve its sustainability, and everybody can take it, change it, do whatever they want with it. From the licensing, that's not a problem. But what we definitely want to do is we want to network the developers and build a development platform so that we can maintain one tree of this very important tool for many cert teams, and would like to prevent that it splits off in many different ways. But still, of course, we want to be capable of supporting those with bright new ideas and would like to offer them the opportunity to do that. But then, when we kind of assess whether it's useful or not in an operational environment, then we would like to have a platform in place where we make decisions on what to take into the core distribution and what to leave out. Of course, we try new ideas for anomaly detection. This is the big thing we are after at the moment. So we would like to see things going wrong, but we would like to see things going wrong which are not that evident. So the really big denial of service attack, that's pretty obvious. You don't need sophisticated tools for that. We would like to see this stuff which is going on, which is not really hitting the ceiling. And That's quite important to find the infected systems, get them clean, use the link we have over the NRENs, the site security contacts, and the sysadmins to actually then do the cleaning. One thing which is still missing is training material and training delivery for the tool set, and we are working on that one. The other activity, reaching the compliance level, we are currently organizing mentoring work between more advanced certs and less advanced certs, and help that way the community to become compliant. That's it. Thank you.
Any questions for Christoph? Heading off for coffee. Okay. Can I mention three things? First is to remind you, please do fill in either the online feedback form, which you should all have been sent an email with a password for. I'm told that if once an individual has filled in sufficient evaluations of sessions of talks, then they qualify for a small gift. I'm not going to tell you either what the gift is or how many you have to fill in to be sufficient. And the other thing is, I think during the break we have the poster sessions, so the people who have submitted posters rather than papers to the conference, these are new results, we hope. All the papers for the conference were submitted before Christmas. So the posters are the new stuff that's happened in the last 6 months. Those people have put as much work in as the speakers have. There should be interesting stuff there. There's an opportunity to go and talk to them. And finally, it's very, very easy chairing a session when all of your speakers stick exactly to time. Very many thanks to all three of you for doing exactly that. And thank you for being here and listening.